What's going on, my people?
Hello, Pastor.
Y'all doing all right today?
Doing great, yes, sir.
Perfect. All right, we're gonna get started with our monthly mental health ministry conversation, which is on post-traumatic stress syndrome. I'm asking that everybody that's watching on Facebook or YouTube, if you can share that post, I would be extremely appreciative. I'm going to now place our conversation in the hands of our mental health ministry co-coordinator, Sister Roxalina Rawls.
Good evening, everyone. First, giving honor to God.
Good evening.
My name is Roxalina Rawls, and as Pastor said, I'm one of the co-coordinators of monthly call mental health. And Pastor, again, I just would like to thank you for this platform and this opportunity to discuss mental health. My topic this evening is PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And Pastor, you're correct in terms of syndrome, because we'll talk a little bit about that. But we're going to concentrate on the disorder this evening. And our initial thoughts of PTSD may be in the context of military members and veterans. However, this disorder is not exclusive to our military personnel, men and women. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, that's NAMI, 8 million people in the United States experience post-traumatic stress disorder. Any traumatic experience can lead to disorder. So this evening, I will share with you some of my research on the topic, as well as my experience in working with individuals who were challenged by this disorder. Keep in mind, based on the statistics, about 50% of all people will go through at least one traumatic experience in their lifetime. However, not everyone will develop PTSD. The good news is the majority of people will not. So the information I will be providing for you this evening will be concentrated on the other 50% that may be struggling with the post-traumatic stress disorder. So Pastor, could you go to slide number 2, please? Okay. Anxiety and flashbacks triggered by a traumatic experience. And on a personal note, and of course, this is a car accident. I don't know if some of you have ever been in car accidents. I know that I was. About, I would say, 12 years ago, I was in a near fatal car accident. And I'll share a little bit about, give you the details a little bit later on in terms of how it affected my life and my post-traumatic stress disorder. So we're going to take a look at slide 3, which is a short video to give you an overview. And then we're going to go and we're going to break it down to individual parts and discuss it a little bit more. Pastor, if you could start the video for me, please.
I didn't even want to go to sleep. The nightmares were so bad.
That image kept coming back to me. I didn't want to remember it, but there it was.
I felt like I was right back there in the middle of that horrible day. The smells, the sounds, it was so real.
I tried to go grocery shopping, but I couldn't be around all those people without seeing the exit.
These are the voices of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Almost everyone lives through something traumatic at some point in life. Most people have a lot of distress right after a trauma happens, but begin to feel better over time. For other people, the distress sticks around and they begin to have symptoms that really affect their lives. For these people, it is almost as if the trauma is still happening, all the time, everywhere, long after it has passed. I know. One of these voices is mine. What do we mean by trauma? When we're talking about PTSD, a trauma is a horrible experience where you might have felt afraid for your life, or you were injured physically or sexually, or were afraid you would be. You can also witness a trauma or hear about it happening to someone you care about. First responders, medical people, and clergy can also experience trauma by hearing others talk about it. For me, it was combat. I saw some really horrible things, and I often thought I might be killed. PTSD develops in some people and not in others. Everyone experiences horrible things differently, and everyone reacts differently, sometimes for years or decades after the event. If you experience post-traumatic stress, it does not mean you're weak or that you can't handle hard things. It may make you feel weak or unsafe, but a lot of strong, brave people are affected by PTSD. And it is treatable. Your provider might think about a diagnosis of PTSD if you've lived through something awful and if you have some specific symptoms for more than 1 month. Intrusion or re-experiencing symptoms. This is the memory of the trauma coming back. It can show up as unwanted memories, nightmares, flashbacks, or feeling horrible after being reminded of it. For me, I kept seeing this one image of a Marine who had just died, and that memory haunted me. Avoidance symptoms. People go out of their way to avoid anything that reminds them of what happened. Some people avoid things like thinking about the trauma. Others avoid people or places or anything else that makes them remember. I couldn't deal with crowded restaurants or movie theaters. I felt unsafe there, so I stayed away, and it affected my family life a lot. Negative changes in thoughts or feelings. This can seem like depression or thinking I'm not safe. I felt sad and didn't feel interested in the activities I used to love. I isolated myself. Other people feel self-blame or might not remember the event well. Some people feel numb or disconnected. Changes in reactivity or arousal. This means your body reacts to things much more than it used to. You feel irritable. You might take risks or act self-destructive. A lot of times you have trouble concentrating and you're always on guard. I was jumpy and loud noises really startled me for a while. I also couldn't sleep for months after coming home and had to take medication. PTSD makes people feel horrible, but I found a way to ask for help. I learned there are several treatments proven to work for combat veterans like me, as well as for survivors of all other types of trauma. These therapies have names like CPT, PE, and EMDR, and they help people get through the trauma by learning to change how they think and feel about it. I was able to get back to living. PTSD is challenging, but there is hope. Talk to your doctor and get some help because treatment works. People can learn to live again. I know. I did.
Okay. Slide number 4. Thank you, Pastor. Let's break down this PTSD. The definition: a disorder in which a person has difficulty recovering after experiencing or witnessing a terrifying event. The condition may last months or decades, with triggers that can bring back memories of the trauma, accompanied by intense emotional and physical reactions. The next slide, Pastor. According to the DSM-5, which is our Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health, the criteria for PTSD includes first direct or indirect exposure to a traumatic event, followed by symptoms in 4 categories: intrusion, avoidance, negative changes in thoughts, mood, and changes in arousal or reactivity. And Pastor, you listed this as PTSS, which the syndrome is the precursor to the post-traumatic stress disorder. You can experience certain symptoms that eventually, this syndrome that eventually leads up to the actual trauma or the diagnosis of the trauma. The next slide. Common types of trauma. And on the video, the individual did list, I guess she was a military veteran, but they're all different types of trauma. And I just want to go down the list because there's different phases for this trauma. Combat exposure, and meaning that you don't necessarily have to be a military personnel. I know years back, I worked with individuals that lived in war-torn countries. They grew up when they 5, 6 years old, and they were able to leave and move here to the United States. And some of those things that they experienced back then, they suppressed. And something as simple as we may think is simple, if they heard a car backfire or just fireworks or sharp noises or things that just out of the blue, that triggered their post-traumatic stress that they had suppressed for many, many years. They were not, as I said, military personnel, but they were individuals that were arousal. Some of these things that were mentioned that occurred early on in their life brought back this trauma. The second type of trauma, childhood physical abuse, molestation. Individuals, young children growing up at some point in time may not feel comfortable being around other adult individuals. There again, this trauma that they had in their childhood may trigger this in their adulthood. Sexual violence, individuals that may have been date raped, having difficulties in being in a relationship with someone. There again, not being able to experience that closeness because of that trauma that occurred early on in their life. A physical assault, someone that may have been assaulted physically and have developed a distrust in people, not wanting to be around people and not trusting individuals. Being threatened by a weapon, having a weapon pulled on them. And again, could be very traumatic for an individual. May not even want to be around any guns or ammunition. And an accident. And I can speak to this, as I said, about 12 years ago, and it may have been more. Maybe it was about 20 years ago. I'm trying to think of how old my daughter was at that time. My family and I were headed, we were in New England, and we were headed back from Braintree, Massachusetts into Connecticut, where we lived at that particular time. And little did we know we were headed into a major snow and ice storm. And as we continued, we were on a 4-lane highway. As we continued along, and as we went up an incline, we slid completely across those 4 lanes. And cars were coming, 18-wheelers were coming, and only by the grace of God, we landed on a guardrail. And we were not injured. We were able to get off of the highway. However, I suppressed that trauma in my life. I try not to think about it. Again, we were a near fatal death situation. I suppressed that for many, many years. And fast forward, talking about the next one that's listed on the list, loss of a loved one or of a friend. My mother died 10 years later, and all of those fears and memories surfaced. And although my mother died, went into cardiac arrest, I immediately thought that I was going to be in cardiac arrest. All of those memories that I had suppressed for many, many years flooded into my mind. And I started thinking the worst possible things would happen to me. And that was a time that I went for help, because those nightmares, those memories continued on until I was not able to handle it. The next one that's on the list is the COVID trauma. For the last 2.5, maybe 3 years, we've been surrounded by people that have died, friends, close friends, loved ones, and think of the many times that they shown on the television in terms of what the national count of deaths were, or the international count. For some individuals, it brought back memories, and it created trauma in their life. And the last one that's on the list is the workplace trauma. And this was new to me. I guess back in the day, we had identified it as a form of discrimination and not being treated fairly. But which exists today in the workplace. And I have a video later on where Dr. Judith would go in a little bit more into that to discuss what it pertains to regarding workplace trauma. So let's pause for a little while. And I'd like to hear any comments that anyone may have that's listening in regarding trauma and your feelings regarding that.
And listening to this first part that you're sharing, I just think it's so important that the church, when I think about coming up, certain people we just, think, okay, they're crazy or this or that, and or they're demon possessed, and I think it's important that the church, that if you're not able to establish this type of ministry to deal with this, that you connect with people, because if we put everything on demons, and that we have to pray to get demons out, God has blessed us with people that can minister, just like he's blessed doctors that does surgery and all kind of other things. God has blessed us with people that can minister to different needs that we have. And I think in the church, if we don't acknowledge this, we could really put people in danger of not being able to live with an issue, because you talked about all the different types of trauma. And I think about Maya Angelou. I think her mom's boyfriend raped her when she was a child, and she didn't even speak for 6 years. And if you don't have, and we can't blame our ancestors because they only had the resources that they knew of. But when you know to do better, you ought to do better. And now we have resources that says, that there are other factors that play a role in behaviors that we have that doesn't seem to be normal. And then it takes, on the part of the pastor, it takes humility to say, hey, guess what? I'm not the only one that God uses. Moses had to come to that understanding. I'm not the only one that God uses to help the people through their issues, and we have to be humble and use. I think we have 5 licensed mental health licensed people, in our ministry, and then we partner with UF. But I think ministries, it's important, as people trust their lives with us, that we understand, this reality, and we make this available to people, because it's not always about praying a demon out of somebody.
Totally agree, Pastor. Totally agree with you. Any other comments?
Sister Roxy,
Yes.
this is Irma. I was
Yeah.
thinking about
Irma?
when you mentioned your accident. I was at a traffic light once and I could see this lady coming across the lane. She was in this huge SUV and I was in this little Galant, and I knew she was going to hit me. It was nothing I could do about it. And I mean, I was not hurt, thank God. But for months, I didn't want to drive anymore. I was just, not that I didn't want to, I actually couldn't, because I'd get in the car and I just shook. So for months, I just had to have one of the kids take me back and forth, because trauma is really something. But I knew what it was, but I couldn't deal with it. And that, yeah. Even thinking about it.
Oh yeah, it's there's an expression: the mind never forgets, and you will be surprised sometimes. You could be somewhere, and something may have occurred early on in your life or any time in your life, and something may trigger that. And I'm not saying that it has to be trauma, but it could be something just to remind you of. Oh, I remember that maybe about 5 years ago, or so on and so forth. It comes back. The mind does not forget. And when you, in terms of that accident, even for today, if someone comes up close when I'm driving and they are tailgating me very closely, I revert back to that. But I've been through counseling and learning and self-help. I've learned how to control my reaction in terms of taking deep breaths, slowing down, and going at the pace, not rushing through, because this person is tailgate on my back. I slow, and that person I would say 9 chances out of 10 backs off. But it can come back. That those thoughts can come back. But I can manage those thoughts now. But there was a time, just like you were saying, Irma, after that situation, I'll say that situation or that challenge, I was not able to get back on the highway. And even today, I do not feel comfortable at all in driving on a 3 or 4 lane highway. So my husband.
I think it's important also for people like me to understand that everybody is different. And so, everybody's different. Their whole makeup is different. What affect one might not affect the other. And to say get over it is not a solution. And it really could probably be something that adds more stress. And and just because one person, I don't do mental health counseling, but I do spiritual counseling, and people react differently. It could be the same type of death or the same type of incident, but people handle it differently because they're different. And I think we have to respect people's difference, and then allow them to get the support they need, but don't think that it's cookie cutter, that their healing is not going to be like someone else's healing, and it's not going to be in the same time frame. But to make sure that we're patient with people and just give them the resource and support that they need to deal. Because I think the main thing is you want to keep people with some type of hope. And because when you give up hope, that's when the suicide and things like that come. And if we can get the type of resources to where, even though they still have the challenges, to where they're receiving resources that gives them hope that it's not going to always be like this. But then don't sell them a pipe dream. I think we just have to look at people differently.
I totally agree. You have to be sensitive to their world. You have to be sensitive to their world. Okay. Any other comments before we move on? Okay, Pastor, slide 7. The next slide. Okay. What does PTSD do to a person? intense, disturbing thoughts and feelings related to their experience, which we just discussed, long-lasting after the traumatic event has ended, relive the event through flashbacks or nightmares, may feel sadness, fear, or even anger, may feel detached or estranged from other people. Okay, next slide. Top 5 signs of PTSD. A life-threatening event. As I mentioned before, I felt that my life was threatened as a result of that accident. This includes a perceived to be life-threatening event, avoidance of external reminders, altered anxiety state, and changes in mood or thinking. Okay, so let's look at this Dr. Judith video. Does trauma lead to PTSD?
You can watch the best parts of this series at medcircle.com. Over 70% of US adults have experienced a traumatic event at least once in their lives. That's over 220 million Americans. And 20% of those people go on to develop the debilitating illness known as post-traumatic stress disorder. So we traveled to New York to sit down with leading psychiatrist and PTSD expert, Dr. Judith Joseph. Welcome to the MedCircle original series, PTSD from Traumatic Events, Ending the Silent Epidemic. Dr. Judith, we just finished filming our 6 episode, I think it's 6 episodes, right guys? 6 episode series on PTSD and traumatic events. Thank you for providing all of this information. What was your favorite part of the series?
My pleasure. I think my favorite part was the sharing part where we both shared our own experiences.
Yes.
Because I think that we can talk a lot about scientific methods and diagnoses and so forth, but people really connect to stories, and that authenticity, I think, will bring people closer to understanding what's happening with them at home.
And I think for you, it gives you an understanding. Not only are you an expert on this, but if you've experienced a traumatic event, and whether or not you were diagnosed with PTSD, you've still gone through something traumatic, and that gives you some insight into, what someone with PTSD has gone through, or at least made that a little bit closer. My favorite part of the series was how actionable your advice and tips were. I always say mental health is complicated, but the solution should be simple, and you gave us a simple solution time after time. I love that. Let's define for the people watching this what exactly PTSD is.
So PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, and it is a category of 4 things that people experience after they have either experienced something life-threatening for themselves, or they've witnessed it happen to someone that they know or care about. And so people can experience avoidance. And that can take several forms. So they may not want to think about the experience or avoid things that remind them of that experience, or people that remind them of that experience. For example, if somebody was attacked or raped, they may avoid that place where they were attacked, or they may avoid people that look like their attacker. Also, another hallmark is re-experiencing that traumatic incident. So they may have that re-experiencing in different ways, such as nightmares that are very vivid, that make them feel as if they're back in that situation, or they could be wide awake and have flashbacks, and they truly believe that they're in that situation where they're traumatized.
That's key there. They truly believe it. There's no difference between this experience and the original expurience, both from their own personal feelings, but actually neurologically what's going on in their brain. And you used some big words, okay? Amygdala, hippocampus, prefrontal cortex, but you made it easy to understand. So I really appreciate that. You explain things very simply. When people experience this traumatic event, what's so frustrating for me, because I read all the comments on our videos, is that they don't know what to do. And so they go through this traumatic event. They are feeling terrible. They think they may have PTSD. They don't know what to do, so they do this. They search, they pay, and then they pray. They search for something on the internet. They pay the first person that will offer them hope, and then they just hope that what they've done is correct. And oftentimes that leads to the wrong diagnosis, so you get the wrong treatment. You end up spending a lot more money and a lot more time on the wrong treatment or the wrong therapist. And most importantly is you don't get the recovery that you deserve. So you have fixed that model, at least for this PTSD series, to help people move in the right direction. What is their first step that they take after that traumatic event to start to recover?
So I think you're absolutely correct. And I'll add to that. When they search and then they find the wrong treatment, it's deflating. It makes them feel even more hopeless than they started off feeling. So I think that the first step is asking for help. And I think that shame and stigma often get in the way of asking for help. So sharing is key, because if you don't share, how are you going to get help?
That's right.
And also, people tend to self-medicate. I can't tell you how many times people tell me that they go to the pharmacy and they pick up over-the-counter medications to help them to alleviate some of that anxiety and the poor sleep. And so self-medicating does have consequences. They can actually, some medications can make your symptoms worse.
Yeah, and there's a lot of myths around PTSD, and I don't think people understand how truly debilitating this is when it is untreated. Talk about what someone's life looks like when they have untreated PTSD.
One of the most memorable cases that comes to mind is this man who was robbed several years ago. And he's a very intelligent man. He's a professional. He's logical. However, he saw someone walking outside of the home, and something about the way this person walked or looked just triggered him. And he truly believed that this person was going to rob him. And he had a full-blown flashback, a re-experiencing that we talked about, where he believed that this man was going to rob him. And his wife described it as like him just like dissociating. She said that his eyes just kind of went to glass, grabbed a gun, went to the window, and he was going to shoot this innocent civilian.
Because he believed that this was happening all over again.
I mean, that is a severe instance, and it can happen. And the longer that these symptoms of trauma go untreated, the more likely that they are to get to this point where it is life or death.
Yeah.
And I mentioned earlier that I've seen some pediatric cases of complex trauma where a little girl that I treated was just headbanging, and no one understood what was going on. And she was dissociating to a point where she didn't feel like she was a part of her own body, so she didn't feel that pain. And people thought, well, this is either schizophrenia or mental retardation, and it just did not add up. And so when trauma goes on for so long and it's not treated, the chances of things getting better become more difficult, more unlikely. And so we want to get the right diagnosis, we want to get the right treatment in place so that the person has the best outcome.
And not surprising, but people with PTSD are often dual diagnosed with depression, substance abuse, or addiction. It's incredibly pervasive.
Yeah.
I think, did you say in the series that 80% of people with PTSD also have a co-occurring mental illness?
So not 80%, but they're more likely compared to people who don't
more
have.
Likely. Yeah.
They're 80% more likely to have like something like depression or anxiety or a substance abuse illness or comorbid condition compared to people who don't. Also, we also talked about how experiencing trauma is very, very common. And so when you look at people who have extreme PTSD, it can look like schizophrenia, it can look like bipolar disorder, but we have to remember that those things are less likely. The incidence of those things happening in our population, they're smaller than PTSD. So always go for the thing that's more likely to happen and then peel back. And that's where having the skills and a trained clinician involved is important.
Well, here was a good reminder from the series when I asked about the signs that you should look out for. And I said, well, Those sound like the same signs of depression. So how do you know if it's PTSD or depression? And you gave me this great reminder. Let's take a look right now. I'm trying to figure out if my husband or my wife is having PTSD, a depressive episode. This is difficult now because those all look the same.
They
so
do.
what do I do?
So as a supportive, loving person in this person's life, it's not your job to diagnose.
Yes. Can you say it louder for the people in the back? It's not your job to diagnose.
My husband accuses me all the time. He's like, you're diagnosing me. I'm like, it's not, I am totally not capable of that.
It might be your job to diagnose. You can actually do it.
I'm like, I have too much baggage in the back of here. It's not going to be a good diagnosis. I mean, when you love someone and you're so invested, you can't.
It's such a great reminder to know it is not the supporter's job to do any of the diagnosing. That's your job over there. So you've got to make sure you know your role as a supporter, and you do that so perfectly throughout this series. And remember, if you want to watch this series, you can go to medcircle.com, become a subscriber, and get access to that series and others. And I hope you do if this is something that is relating to you either on a personal level or you know somebody who has or may have PTSD. Now, Dr. Judith, you brought up something that I had never heard of, but I was really excited to talk about it. It's called workplace PTSD. We did an entire episode on it, but tell the viewers what that is.
So when you think about PTSD, you think that your life is in danger or someone that you know their life is in danger. You don't think about anything else. And I'm hoping to change that. So what I've found in my practice is that when people truly believe that they can lose their job, when their livelihood is threatened, they can have some of those symptoms of PTSD that other people have. They can have avoidance, they can have hypervigilance, they can have nightmares. All of the physiological things that you see someone who survived something traumatizing, let's say their life being threatened, they can have those same symptoms if they believe that their livelihood is being threatened.
Yeah. And you're the pioneer on this.
I am.
The reason you haven't heard about this and I haven't heard about this is because she, Dr. Judith, is the one pioneering this, doing the research, coming out with the book, all on this concept of workplace PTSD. And I will applaud you on how you handled my questions because I really brought some skepticism to that. I said, what about the people who just think, well, our society is getting weaker? What about the people who think this is a joke and we're just trying to diagnose everybody? And you gave such great, poignant answers that really made me even see PTSD in a different way. So again, wonderful, wonderful job. Now, what are you most excited for, and what do you hope people will get, the big takeaway that people get after watching your series?
So I think that people have a lot of information from online resources, and not all online resources are vetted like MedCircle. So it's so important to have real clinicians, real experts, putting the right content out there, because if you don't have the right content, then it's like the blind leading the blind. So I think it's so important to have vetted experts talking about these topics, because then you're not really getting the help that you need.
Yeah, I've learned that a lot. I look back at my mental health journey and kick myself, because if I had known what I know now, going through what MedCircle provides, because although I work for MedCircle, I am also a user of MedCircle. If I knew what I knew back then, I would have had fast results. I would have spent way less money because I wouldn't have been in treatment so much. And I think I would have lived an even happier life. I've lived a great life, but I think it would have even been happier. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. I'm Kyle Kittleson, and remember, whatever you're going through, you got this. Thanks for watching. Your next step is to go to medcircle.com and finish watching this series. There you can also access other series and get actionable advice and simple explanations. Continue your mental health journey at medcircle.com, and I'll see you there.
Okay, all right. Any comments?
Yeah, Sister Rosalind, can you hear me? This is
Yes, sir. We can.
Yeah, I was writing down and I was listening to the doctor, and I had my uncle. He's passed on now, and he dealt with PTSD from the military, and they're really not investigating, but they're really trying to figure out something with that right now. I got a question for you, and it's not a concern, but it's just an issue that I was writing down some stuff, and I'm gonna ask you, when you say self-medication, when them guys was coming from Vietnam and things like this, I think I ain't thinking. I know they didn't do them right. They was over there getting high and stuff, just trying to keep their minds off of what they was doing there. When they came back, all the government at that time just let them do what they did, and they just gave them medicine to calm them down. But they didn't go a step further, and that's why you see a lot of that going on today. Because I seen it in my uncle. I seen it. The question I want to ask you, because I know that's a big issue, but I just had to say that, is there, and before you answer it, I'm gonna make that issue so you can do it all at one time. But my question was, is there such thing as too far gone? What I mean by that is people that's been dealing with this and they're coming up with all these ideas now. And is it such thing as the people that was dealing with this for years and years and years, never got the right attention and went to the right resources throughout the companies or even like the government back to them to help these people? Keep that pin in that. Is there such thing as too far gone? And I got down here, I noted untreated. And I got on here long-time trauma. Can we look at long-time trauma with people with long-time trauma as people that were in position that they was misunderstood and they was misdiagnosed? Like, it's almost like they treated that PSTD like a Band-Aid. They didn't never operate on it or never go any deeper. They just gave just enough. Now it's out of control. It's so bad now, they don't even know. That's why I asked the question, is it anything such as too far gone? That's all I got, because I was listening to that, but I'm listening to what they're trying to do, but I don't understand what they're going to do with these people that are. What I'm just asking is too far gone.
Okay. There's always hope. There's always hope.
Yes, ma'am.
I think that's a broad question. They would have to look at each individual separately and let that clinician or the person decide, do the diagnosis, do the assessment, and let them come up with a solution to whether it is or it isn't. But my response is there's always hope.
Right. I guess what I'm trying to say, I'm trying to say, we walk by every day, every other store you go in, where you probably don't go to these Circle K's or these stores that are these little short convenience stores. You probably go to Publix and stuff where they kind of don't allow them to be around. But you know what I'm saying? You always be greeted by somebody, and we're not judging, because the lady said that we can't diagnose nobody, but how they gonna reach to these people that, what you said about hope, how do hope get to these people that don't have any hope, and it seems like they just forget about them? They call them out of bums, homeless. They start giving titles for them, and it ain't the people that walk around give them titles in government. You know what I'm saying? We reach out and we do a lot of stuff for countries and this and that, but they walk right by these people every day, because every day I go into one of these little quick stores and I'm greeted with somebody with issues. I don't know what they issues, but I see it. What are they going to do about that?
So
I don't hear that. So
my comment to response to that is there are times that the government will not take on the responsibility.
There you go.
They will not be responsible for the individuals that served our country, men and women, and come back with challenges. And they do not want to take on that responsibility. It's unfortunate. And yes, something should be done about that. Right.
And the people in the school, I'm talking about school. I seen some guys, these guys ain't even 25. I know they ain't been to boot camp. I'm starting to see more and more young people on the street, Sister Roxanne. And I know I'm not trying to get on you, but I'm just saying, I'm listening to this stuff, but I see different. And I ain't talking about military personnel now, because I just seen two guys today And I ain't talking about, I don't know what drugs, this don't even look like that because I done seen them before this epidemic even started with all this. So I don't know what they dealing with, but I'm seeing more and more young people. They reach out in school and you start having problems then can be identified by the school system, but they start labeling them people early, and that's where they lose their hope at. Like they picking on them, and they don't like they have time to invest in them in the school. Now we ain't talking military, and then they end up on the street. That's all I got. That's all I got.
Yeah, it's very easy.
I think you lose valuable time when you look for someone else to work out a situation. I think what we have to look at is say, you know what we're doing is helpful. You know, the fact that anybody has access to what we're doing, and then we share it to other websites that don't have anything to do with church, and then somebody might just slow down and look at it and say, you know what, and somebody might say, you know, this might be, let me go and pursue this. You know, Roxy told them about NAMI. I mean, there are things that we're doing that helps the problem. And even if it's only in a small way, you know, when you get more people doing what we're doing, and I think that's probably what we should really focus on. Hey, what we're doing helps. And we can't really expect, but God provided ministry to help people. And if government decides to do something that's good, okay, fine, that's great. But ministry ought to meet the needs of people. And when we see ministry as more than jumping up and down in church and singing songs, but ministering to the whole person, that's where God begins to provide and meet the needs for his people.
Amen. 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 Amen.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Every little bit helps. This is a start. Okay. This is an avenue. It really helps.
Okay. PTSD cannot be cured. However, it can be treated and managed in several ways. Meditate, stay active, exercise boosts your mood, get a service dog, offers companionship and common effects, set boundaries. Families and friends can be impacted by a single person's struggle with this PTSD. When someone is exposed to traumatic events such as a sexual assault or natural disaster, their boundaries and sense of safety are violated. So being aware of this may be a family member, may be a friend, being aware and maybe asking yourself, what role can I play? Like you said, what role can I play as an individual or as a community? Find a creative outlook, hobbies, creative writing, crafting. Build a support network beneficial with coping, which is what we're doing, coping with mental health condition. Try aromatherapy and seek counseling. Seek counseling. And we offer counseling through our church, through our ministry. That's what we're all about. So the next slide. Main goals, and if you do decide to seek therapy, the main goals for therapy is to improve your symptoms, treat your skills to deal with it, and to restore your self-esteem. And then there's a list of the different types of therapy. I'm sorry? Did someone say something?
No, ma'am.
Okay. The types of therapy, which is CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, which is train you how to think differently. I think I shared something with you regarding that near fatal accident in terms of how I had to think through that and change my way of thinking in terms of thinking not so much as, well, this is going to happen again to me, that no, what cannot happen again to me. Change that way of thinking. The second therapy, prolonged exposure therapy. And the third, eye movement, desensitize and reprocessing. getting you to think differently regarding this trauma that may have occurred. The next slide. Okay. The more we understand post-traumatic stress disorder, the more we can be helpful for a family member or friend being challenged by this disorder. We can be loving, we can be encouraging, we can be gentle, we can be supportive, and we can be non-judgmental. Remember, always keep in mind, the individuals that may be experiencing this do not see the world as we see the world. So we have to be very sensitive, supportive, and responsive to the individuals.
Roxy, would you agree also that we must be careful? Because I can think, because some people, that even though this is a disorder, it's a disease, it's something that people are suffering from, can be very dangerous. And so I remember something earlier about setting boundaries. And sometimes, in spiritual counseling, I try to tell people, you can't fix everybody's issue. But you do have to make sure that you listen to God and you look out for yourself also. And so in all these B's, I think we also need to be careful. And sometimes if we need to remove ourselves from a situation, understand that we are not God or the deliverer. And sometimes we might be better supported from a distance if it's dangerous.
I totally agree with you. Totally agree with you.
Amen. And on that note there, I experienced seeing that. First of all, I want to say, Sister Rosalina, I got it. And that just seemed like I was kind of like a little harsh with you. I felt like I was, and that wasn't my intention. No, I felt like I was trying, something was bothering me. No, but I don't want to get used to it with me, man. I'm a nice guy. Look, but I see, Rev, you ain't got to do all that, man. Them people looking at you on Facebook. Look, hey, check this out. Check this out, Sister Rosalina. I experienced seeing somebody that they would see every day, and they knew they had some type of issue and was nice. And I seen this lady one day, told the guy to come to the car, she was gonna give him $1. And he punched her in the face. And that's the point that we have to be careful that you don't get relaxed with well doing. And I think Rev hit it the best, that we have to hear from God, because it's some people that are in jail or prison right now that have committed some type of battery or something on somebody with issues and don't even remember they did it. So we have to be careful. Absolutely. And I just was just piggybacking off Reverend Ross.
Absolutely.
That's all I got.
Absolutely. Well, are there any other comments?
See, I remember when you said that the mind does not forget.
That's correct.
I remember when I was, I think, 7th or 8th grade, and my sister, who is considerably older, was married at the time, and she and her husband bought a porterhouse steak, and they asked me to cook it. Well, I cooked the way I know how to cook. I knew how to cook at the time. Well, apparently it was wrong, and because I smothered it or something, and they made a big deal out of it. Mm-hmm. And when their friends came around, they would bring it up and embarrass me about what I'd done to this 2-pound, blah, blah, blah. And it really hurt me. And it made me think of something Reb had said too, because when I mentioned it to mother, it was like, oh, well, it's not a big deal. It's, that's the way they are. But you have to be careful what you say to children. It stuck with me. And this is years ago, over 60 years ago. It stuck with me. But the one thing it did was make me a very good cook, because I was determined to find out what made this cut of meat. I had no idea that there were different cuts of meat that came from different parts of the cow, but I was determined. And so now, and Reverend Ross knows because I had to call him one day about now. I made her a cake once and she got upset with me because I wouldn't bring her the cake. I told her, I said, you can't. So she just went off the rails. I thought, Reverend Ross, I said, Rev, I'm not doing this. And he said, no, what did you make the cake for in the beginning? I said, okay. He said, well, do that and be done with it. And I did. I didn't make another one, Rev, but I did what I did. That one.
But that's what happened when your food tastes like crack and people get addicted to it. It make people act weird.
But I was thinking about that. When you say stuff to kids, you have to be careful because it sticks with the mind does not forget.
The mind does not forget. And, everybody, maybe another person, what they said to you about that porterhouse steak, maybe someone else would have received that a different way. But all these years, you remember that.
Oh, yes.
So when's the last time you cooked a porterhouse steak?
New Year's.
I'm just teasing.
Yeah, but New Year's.
I'm just teasing.
Roxy, that might be a nice little birthday gift when y'all celebrate my birthday on Sunday. Boy, that might be a nice little birthday gift.
Okay. Well, I just want to end by saying, with hope and through our faith and help, we can make a difference in our mental well-being. So keep that in mind to support one another. And I just thank you, Pastor, for putting the screen up. There are mental health therapists in the Gainesville area, and I've listed 2. And at the end of all of my presentations, I'll make sure to list, that was some feedback that I got from one of my previous presentations. Please share with us individuals that if people would like to go to mental health therapists, list their names and their contact information, and especially people of color that may have had the life experience that we have had. So I will continue to do that, and I hope that it will be of some help to others. And as I mentioned before, we do have an in-house mental health counseling, which is free. All you need to do is contact the church, and we certainly can make arrangements to schedule sessions or a session for individuals. So keep that in mind. We're here to serve you and provide the help that you may need.
Miss Shawn asked me, we have someone on our Zoom platform. Her name is Janice Jackson, and I think she's a pharmacist. And Miss Shawn wanted to ask her, can you say it, baby? Sure. Is there anything that she would like to share in terms of medicating medication as it relates to mental health ministry or post-traumatic stress disorder? Any warnings or anything Janice Jackson would like to add to the conversation? And she might not even still be on here. Oh, yeah, she's on here. Okay, she might not be able to talk, though. All right, but I was just being obedient to my wife.
Oh, okay. All right. Any other questions or concerns? That's all that I have, Pastor. You can close us out.
All right, perfect. Great discussion. Go ahead and share it with someone that you have not diagnosed, but you have noticed that there's this might be a benefit to them. And again, you visit gbgville.com. We have group therapy, individual therapy for youth and adults that's available on the Real Entrepreneurs of Greater Bethel, that page on our website. you'll see the two contacts that were given and their information. But God bless you, and we thank you for joining. Roxy, you did a wonderful job. You all have a great week and make God proud by the life that you live.
Good job, Sister Roxy.
Thank you.
Good job. Excellent job. Good night, all.
Good job, sister.
Good night.
Good night.